Okay, and let's talk about all the enhancements around the API server and the HTML5 web. This is the biggest chunk overall. As you know, during versions 9 to 9.2, I like to say we are implementing a lot of functionality into our standard web portal, the new one, the Angular-based, to replace web design. Let's start. What's not available? I think that is one of the most important messages here. Just in the new GUI, I'm talking about the Angular web front. You see that here in a list. I don't want to read that from top to down, but you see a lot of features are missing. Again, it is planned up to version 9.2 to get a feature parity. I really hope that our web developers are able to make it happen. But this is what's going on right now, and this is missing currently in the new standard web. Please remember, there are as well features in the new standard web which are not in the old web designer portal, so currently you need to use a mixture out of both. If we look into the new HTML5 web, then one of the biggest changes is that one login multi-factor authentication is integrated. This is now the step up authentication. What that is the following: for requests or for attestation approvals. It is possible to just configure an additional login. Yeah? You are logged into the front end, you do their work there, then you step into a request or an approval process, and then part of that process is that the front end, where you already logged in, just prompts you for another login. That is, of course, for security, and that is what that means. If we then look again on the multi-factor authentication side, then it is possible to use the API server admin portal. That means the new standard web portal together with a second factor, which is the one login MFA. Could be the first, could be the second. And typically it is just an alternative to the login that exists. How to do that? To configure it, of course, you need to hack the web.config of that specific web portal. There is a line to add. You can see that right there. And of course, you need to add the connection string there that contains all of that. From a portal side, there are many changes currently, a lot of improvements, performance, and of course, a very detailed and hard work together with the UX designer to make a better user experience. The new catalog page here, that is one of these specific changes that happens. It is in the meantime better to be used with smaller devices. Honestly, from my personal perspective, okay, I have gray hair and I can say that. I don't see cell phones as, I like to say, a device to handle such a huge featured web portal. But however, this support is improved together with others. That means it gets better and better. Again, from a service catalog perspective, now we are looking a little bit on the API server side. It could be that all the items just part of the catalog are not alphabetically sorted anymore. This is because they get pre-sorted from the API server side, and there is no alphabetically sorting part of it. However, if that feature is not convenient to you, it is easy. You can override it. Therefore, you can then use in the API configuration that key you can see on the left lower, which is do not sort on API server. Again, HTML5 web portal, if we look into that, you see it is now possible to add terms of use. We know that the one or the other for compliance needs terms of use. Whatever else reason exists for that, it is now possible in the new standard web to just put something like that in. It is then for requesters, it is then for recipients, and these people have just to commit that they read that and accepted these specific of use. The whole thing can be configured as a plain text file and maintained or uploaded to the portal. There is a new menu item available, of course. It is underneath of the request menu. There are now request templates available, could be configured and maintained. Number 2 on that slide is that it is now possible to add service items directly into a request template. Remember, in the past, it was necessary to add them to the shopping cart first before you was able to add them to the template. This is not necessary anymore. You can directly add them now. And another improvement on service items are best to see on the right hand side in the picture. What you can see there is dependencies of service item. Let me say you want, just as you can see it here in the picture, just request a laptop. Then it is possible for the people maintaining the IT shop to configure for that laptop a dependence, so that this laptop, as you see it on the screen, always came together with a laptop mouse. That means it is not possible for the requester just to uncheck the box and say, I don't want the mouse is mandatory, you will get it together with the laptop. In difference to that, the other one, which is as well dependent, but on the other hand not mandatory, is the laptop keyboard. As you can see it, this is an option a user can choose. That means the user chooses the laptop, he gets the mouse on top, and he can choose if he needs a keyboard or not. This is now configurable, mandatory, and dependencies are now available for service items. You remember there's that feature that you can request something based on a reference user. But having a reference user, the question is what references to be taken. It is configurable now to show two different options. The first option, which is the default, is that you only see items which are just requested by that specific reference user. And the second option is, if that switch is taken, you see it on the right side, that you see all items which are assigned to that specific reference users, independent if they are requested or just directly assigned. An improvement exists as well for the history, as you see it here. For the new role feature, there's now a Show History tab available, and that History tab shows all the last changes happens on that specific role overview. Again, another feature we know from the Web Designer portal exists now in Angular as well. These are combining roles. This tool allows us just to combine two roles together. And of course, that could be done with the standard business roles, and that contains cost centers, department, locations, and business roles, of course. You might have heard it. I was talking about the technical business roles. That means base tree entries, and that contains the items that was named. The whole thing exists as well with a restore functionality. That means if you have combined two roles, it is possible for a while to restore the old configuration. If you look at the company policy level, it was not possible just to grant exceptions on compliance violations. This is now possible. A grant or denial on company policies is available. In the good old world of Web Designer, it was possible just to define an additional filter for collections, that means data collections, to be loaded, and it was possible to define read-only properties for the web front. This is now possible with the new HTML5 portal as well, and therefore exists now a configuration, as you can see. If you have a look here and in the samples, then you can see here the form that is used for configuring filter conditions. This is the form that configures then read-only properties. And at the end, filter conditions for specific FKs does work as well. And that is the sample page for this. Again, another feature which is necessary for backend developers is to talk about routes. It is necessary in the API server to work with routes. Honestly, routes are something which other people know as REST endpoints. However, these routes get automatically created, which could lead, especially if other developers are working on the backend, and I talk about partners and customers, to get 2 times the same route, automatically built out of something which is similarly named, and then you have 2 routes doing different things, which is much more problematic. In these cases, there was some nice effects in the past. I'm not quite sure in which order then the routes was used. However, this is now completely solved in a way of that if something like that happens, that means if customization was leading to two times the same route, during the start of the API server, you will see an error message. This is the message on the button of the slide that says, hey guy, there are 2 routes. Please now do some configuration to ensure that for one purpose only exists one. And now let's talk about the enhancements of the history database. Let's start. First of all, the history database, which is, I like to say, one of the smaller tools in big enterprises, often used but not really maintained all the time because it is a second development. This was completely reviewed and completely improved in a way of it is much faster now, of course. And as you can easily see it supports as well the Azure SQL databases right now. To do so, it was important that the whole thing was simplified on the one hand side and all functionality in the history database was moved out. That means the history database from now on for local installation or Azure-based installation is of course nothing other else than a small and thumb data store. Small of course out of the box because once all the data gets historized, it could be getting huge. However, this thing exists now, and the complete transport of all of the history data that happens now via job tasks directly from the main database. All declarations like before, that means availability of the history database and connection to the history database, happens in Designer as it was before. Another thing that might be of interest is that if there are history databases from the past, it is nice if they are online during the migration to a 9.x version. Additionally to that, if you want to work with history databases in the future, the fastest and easiest way to get them installed is to install the history database first. During the installation of the Identity Manager, it will then be recognized. However, if you migrate older history databases, that means databases that was existing before that change happened, it is necessary to back up these installations. Reason for is that, as you can easily see it, during the migration of the history database to the new functionality, all stuff besides the named procedures gets deleted from the history database. That means all stored procedures which are custom or somehow other else created are then going away. If you want to continue with some, especially with your customizations, ensure that you have nice backups of these procedures so that later on you can insert them again into the database. And now let's talk about minor changes and enhancements. We start with the configuration wizard. In the configuration wizard exist two new options. One option allowed to delete databases. You might remember in the past it was necessary from time to time, especially in test environments, to delete Identity Manager databases, and for, I like to say, the beginner, it was a pain because there were some manual steps necessary before this was possible. Now in the new configuration wizard there is an option available which will delete databases. Secondly, there is now the support for enabling restored databases. Again, if there was a database created from a backup, typically a backup from another database name or something like that, or another server, there were some manual steps necessary just to make it happen before the database was accessible. This is now automated just using another task. Two new convenience features, one a little bit more dangerous than the other. The more dangerous, of course, is to deleting the database, which means be careful, you don't want to delete your production database. Another feature in the database transport exists, and that implemented feature supports now to group transports together. What does that mean? For bigger enterprises, it is necessary to just collect transports to get inserted at once and to bring them together in a group. That means you can just say this bunch of transports needs to be handled in the following order, which can be defined, and maybe with the one or the other import condition if necessary. And then the transporter will just transport that transport package set. Another feature in the transporter, of course, is to support files, and that in a specific way and manner. Therefore, you can now just define so-named patch files, and these patch files allow then to handle, for example, as well QBM file revisions entries. This was not possible before. You did it with the software loader, but now there's a functionality available in the transporter as well. Another feature implemented into the transport is that it now supports transport templates. That means you can define something in XML structure, you can see it there, and it will then automatically take, depending on these specific bases, we are talking about the my changes transport, something from the database. Personally, I like to work more with change labels, but it's up to what's the use. I think this is a really helpful feature. Let's have a look at least to the configuration of the DB compiler cmd.exe. I'm talking about the database compiler, and I'm not talking about the database compiler GUI. I'm talking about the command line option of this specific thing. In the past, it was not possible only to compile changes with that specific exe file. This is now possible. There's a new switch -c implemented that could be used for that. And a very technical one, just for people loving scripts. First of all, there could be a use case that means if in a script 1 that runs first, something happens in a specific parameter, then it is necessary in script 2, for example, to configure a parameter as mandatory. To support something like that, we implemented a trigger in scripts which allows to figure out if property change happened. The whole thing exists for vb.net, and of course it is something very specific. Another specific thing is a new task for our SQL component. The SQL component supports now a task called execute SQL single, which can be used if you want to exclusively run a specific SQL procedure. And of course, a new feature in the 9 version is the integration of events into the type-saved database model. What's meant there? You remember the type wrappers we have to easily work with, for example, column names and table names and something like that. And that was improved in a way of that this is now possible for events as well, which makes it easier to implement. Last but not least, 2 optimizations. First, the left-hand side on the application server front end. If you just connect to the application server using a browser, you get a front end. Okay, you have to log in first. But however, there is now a new functionality implemented which allows to just start the index optimization for the search manually, which was not possible before. Additionally to that, the whole GUI was a little bit improved and looks nicer and cleaner now. On the right hand side, the job server, the same thing happens for the job server logs. We talked about them under the umbrella of some security before, but in this very specific case, a new optimization happened, which allows now an auto log scrolling on log pages, which could be really helpful if these damn things are more than 4 megabytes long. So ladies and gentlemen, that was exactly all the news about the 9 version. Yes, there are the one or the other features coming up with minor versions, 9.1, 9.2, and so back and so forth. Please have a look into the very specific release notes of these specific versions. However, the best guess with these new features as you need them is just to have a look into the manual first, then to try to implement that into your 9x version and figure out how it works. Of course, that training was only for experts. Of course, that was not a big demo because, as you have seen it, we talked about features and enhancements on more than 100 slides. Bye bye and see you next time.